was our first attempt at a major
but
aid
you
program.
do understand that sometimes
just
a soldier can be as useful as a bushel of wheat, don't you?
No, look, nevertheless, if we're going to be at all clear about the American role, we're certainly going to distinguish between military intervention and economic intervention. They're very different in the way they function. Now, the fact of the matter is that neither was disinterested in your sense, I don't think, but they're very different in the impact that they had. The Truman Doctrine, I think, was a disastrous venture. I think the Marshall Plan was arguable. I mean, one understood what
how do you
for,
explain the schizophrenia?
I don't agree with it.
How do you explain the schizophrenia of a public which willed both more or less simultaneously? On the one hand, you say that the public is incapable of acting disinterestedly.
The public didn't will either.
Well, the government, all right, the
government. Because both were...
But the government backed by the public, how's that? How do you explain that the same government on Monday did the Truman Doctrine, which you consider simply sort of being a projection of the evil impulses of the government, and on Tuesday did something which you consider to be very good? What happened to the government between Monday and Tuesday?
First of all, I didn't say I consider it to be very good. I said it's rather different, and one has to bring different standards to bear in evaluating it.
But why is it different? Let me give you an example. Suppose you're a farmer.
Because there's a difference between receiving...
And you need agriculture. You need fertilizer, so you apply to me for fertilizer, but just before I get it to you, somebody comes up with a bayonet and is about to make it impossible for you to continue farming. Now, in that particular instance, is there a strategic difference between my giving you the fertilizer and my giving the soldier who routs?
That's not. So you're talking about the dream world. The real world is one, because the real world is one in which the alternatives were coming with a bayonet, which is on an American rifle held by an American-backed Greek soldier, and the alternative to that was giving the kind of aid which was used, in fact, to construct the kind of society in Western Europe that we wanted to see developed there. Now, these are two very different things. It's a very different thing to introduce, to run for the Greek army a counterinsurgency program with military support and many military men involved. That's one kind of thing, one sort of repression imposed on the Greek population through American intervention. One might argue whether it's right or wrong, but that's to be very sharply distinguished.
Why do you say imposed? Why do you say imposed? Is it because your presumption here...
My presumption is that
your presumption here is that the Greeks would like the kind of regime which resulted...
My assumption is that all intervention is imposed by any country. That is, you see, I believe that quite generally...
Did we impose on the French when we liberated them from the Nazis? Was that an imposition?
We didn't conquer France. We moved the Germans out of it. Just from an outside invading force.
We invaded
But we
France.
didn't conquer it from its own people. See, in Greece, we were trying to conquer it from its own people.
But there you're willing to credit the anti-Nazis as their own people, but you're not in Greece willing to credit the anti-communists as their own people.
The German army was there. There was no outside army in Greece other than ours.
Look, there are modalities of outside intervention.
But look, there's a very sharp difference between... Just a minute, there's a very sharp difference
Laval was not a Nazi.
But Laval wouldn't have lasted for 5 minutes without the German army.
And nor would Makarios have lasted for 5 minutes without the help of Russian aid.
But wait a minute.
In fact, as you know, when Stalin got tired of Makarios, he pulled out.
But look, now let's be careful again. I mean, there's a difference between... First of all, I'm opposed to military aid to other countries, whether by us or by the Soviet Union. Well, let's come back to that because it's a more important thing. And that is that I'm even far more opposed to the imposition of regimes by foreign troops. Now, in the case of Germany, let's say, in the case of France, the Pétain-Laval government, the Vichy government, was supported by German troops. Had the German, they weren't throughout the country necessarily, because there was certainly indigenous support, but there's no question that if German military force had been withdrawn to the other side of the Rhine, then there would have been an overthrow of the Vichy government, and France would have had some different form of government. Now, in that case, our invasion of France was, whether one likes it or not, was in reaction to an occupying external force. It's just pure confusion to identify that with the case of Greece when we were trying to liberate, we were trying to select the kind of society that Greece would have, and we were trying to save the rulers that we had designated as appropriate from their own population. There were no outside forces.
But don't you realize that in your book, and that's why you're not willing to be consistent in carrying out this argument, you're constantly talking about our satellizing of places like Cuba and the Dominican Republic and so on and so forth, and yet we never occupied them in the sense in which you're talking about.
Well, we never occupied the Dominican Republic. We sent 25,000 troops there in 1965 in an occupation.
No, I'm talking about I'm talking
well,
about
the American Marines were in there dozens of times since 1900.
I think you're being evasive, and I don't think you want to be.
No,
Let me ask you this. Is it possible?
It's not evasive at all.
Is it possible?
You know, we just simply repeatedly sent troops to Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic, Cuba, et cetera, et cetera.
Is it possible to satellize a nation without having an occupying army there?
Yes, it is.
All right, then there goes your French, your tedious French explanation.
Oh, not at all, because that doesn't happen to be, you see, we're talking about a real situation.
Yeah.
We could talk about some ideal situation and, you know, have an academic discussion about it.
I'm saying,
but
therefore,
we're
it
talking
is
about
possible for
the real
North Vietnam
situation in France.
to satellize South Vietnam, presumably, without even
It's logically possible, but it
occupying it
didn't
militarily and in a formal sense.
but it didn't happen, though. So there's no
Well,
point
this
discussing
is
it.
an argument concerning which there are 2 points of view.
Well, let's discuss it then.
Historically.
Yeah, in fact, you see,
That's
there's much
right,
more, if you want to be serious about it, there's more evidence that South Vietnam tried to colonize North Vietnam than conversely. In fact, South Vietnamese commandos were going, military forces, regular military forces, were going north considerably earlier than the time when we even proclaimed that the infiltration began from north to south.
Did they bump into the refugees coming south?
The refugees were coming south were going in both directions, in fact, in 1954-55, and at least according to Bernard Fall, the commandos began going north in 56 or 57. The first claimed infiltration from the north was in 59, and that was South Vietnamese coming south. So if one wants to talk about, again, the real world, the first motion
the trouble is, your difficulty, Mr. Chomsky, is, in my judgment, you never know where neatly to begin your historical
well, you choose
sequence.
the point of beginning.
Well, the point really is that if you're starting to say that 1959 was a provocation because there was...
No, it wasn't a provocation. I said that's when we claimed that the
I say, well,
began.
but how about the people who were going from north to south who were talking about the misery that had been brought about Ho Chi Minh and so forth?
When was that?
I mean...
Well, which people are you talking about? I don't know.
Well, I'm talking about Vietnamese, north and south. Your trouble, I think, is neatly captured in the remark made recently by Czechoslovakia, that Czechoslovakia is, after all, the most neutralist country in the world, since it declines to interfere even with its own internal affairs.
I'm afraid I don't see the relevance of that remark.
Well, the relevance is very simply that you start your line of discussion at a moment that is historically useful for you.
That's what I say, you pick the beginning.
Of the post-war world is that the communist imperialists, by the use of terrorism, by deprivation of freedom, have contributed to the continuing bloodshed, and the sad thing about it is not only the bloodshed, but the fact that they seem to dispossess you of the power of rational observation.
May I say something?
Sure.
Yeah. I think that's about 5% true, and or maybe 10% true. It certainly is true.
Why do you give that?
May I complete a sentence?
Sure.
I mean, it's perfectly true that there were areas of the world, in particular Eastern Europe, where Stalinist imperialism very brutally took control and still maintains control. But there are also very vast areas of the world where we were doing the same thing. And there's quite an interplay in the Cold War. You see, what you just described is I believe, a mythology about the Cold War, which might have been tenable 10 years ago, but which is quite inconsistent with contemporary scholarship.
Ask a Czech.
Ask a Guatemalan, ask a Dominican, ask a person from the Dominican Republic, ask a person from South Vietnam, ask a Thai.
Well, obviously, we can't get away. If you can't distinguish between the nature of our venture in Guatemala and the nature of the Soviet Union's in Prague, then we have real difficulty.
Explain to me the difference.
Sorry.